Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I grew up in a town where everyone knew everyone. It was the kind of place where nothing stayed secret for long, where neighbors waved at each other every morning, and where faces stayed familiar even as the years rolled by. The streets were narrow, lined with tired old maples that had been there long before I was born. Our house sat right on Main Street, just past the bakery and across from the little park where kids used to gather in summer. It wasn't fancy. 2 stories, wood siding that always seemed to need a fresh coat of paint, and a sagging porch that creaked no matter how careful you walked. But it was old. Everyone in town knew our house. It was one of the first built on the street. Some said it used to be a boarding house. Some said it was once a store. No one seemed to know for sure. When we moved in, the basement light was already on. I remember standing at the top of the stairs looking down into that dull yellow glow. The basement smelled like damp concrete and rust. The air was colder than the rest of the house, heavy in a way that made it feel like it had been closed off for too long. My dad flipped the switch at the top of the stairs. The light went out and we went upstairs. It didn't seem like anything worth remembering at the time. A few minutes later, I went back down to grab something from a storage box. The light was on again. I remember how that glow bled into the shadows at the top of the stairs, how it made my skin crawl for no real reason. I stood there, hand on the railing, trying to think if maybe I'd imagined Dad turning it off. But I hadn't. It was on again. I went down, turned it off myself, went back up. The next morning it was on. For a while we told ourselves it was wiring. Old houses do weird things. It's not unusual. The house made strange noises at night too. Popping wood, pipes knocking, air moving through old vents. It wasn't a new house smell or feeling. Everything about it was aged. But the light started to become a pattern. Every night before going to bed, someone would turn it off. Sometimes an hour later, sometimes minutes later, it would be on again. Electricians came out twice. They replaced the bulb, then the switch. They even ran new wiring down the wall. Nothing changed. The light would turn itself on. I started avoiding the basement when I could. Something about it made me uneasy. Not because I thought anything supernatural was down there, but because of how quiet it was. The air was still heavy. The walls were made of cracked concrete, and along the far end was a crawl space. It was just a dark opening beneath the stairs that led to where the foundation dropped lower. My dad stacked old boxes in front of it. He didn't like it either. The ground there was dirt. No one ever went in. At night, my room was above part of the basement. There was a vent in the corner of my floor that let the warm air rise. I'd never really noticed it before, but as the days went by, I'd find myself staring at that vent whenever the house was quiet. If the light was on downstairs, a faint yellow glow leaked up through it, just enough to see a blur of light on the floor. One night I woke up and that glow was there. It was around 3 in the morning. The rest of the house was dark and still. I lay there for a long time listening. Nothing, no creak, no footstep, no wind. Just that dim light. I told myself to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. My chest felt tight. I climbed out of bed, careful not to make noise, and crept down the hallway. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I padded down the stairs barefoot, every step sounding louder than I wanted it to. When I reached the bottom, I stood at the top of the basement stairs. The door was open. The light was glowing below. I started down slowly. My heartbeat was so loud I could feel it in my throat. As I rounded the bottom step, the light snapped off. Just like that, I froze mid-step, one hand gripping the railing so tight it hurt. My eyes tried to adjust to the sudden dark, but everything below was just black. A stale, cold draft came up from the crawl space area. I didn't move for several seconds. I don't think I even breathed. The switch was up at the top of the stairs, so it wasn't a power surge or anything like that. Someone had to be down there. I bolted back up, feet slapping the steps, slammed the door, and ran down the hallway yelling. The house was awake within seconds. Police came. They went through the basement with flashlights, checked every corner. They didn't find anyone. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, no open windows. They said old wiring can flicker and go out. Said maybe the switch had a loose connection. They didn't make a big deal out of it. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking that night. For the next week, my parents kept the bulkhead door outside locked with a padlock. We started leaving the basement light on intentionally at night, hoping it would stop the weird on and off thing. But it didn't help. Some mornings the light was off. Sometimes we'd hear the faintest thud at night, like something moving just below the floor. Never sounded loud, just enough to make you question whether you actually heard it. Then one night, our neighbor, who lived across the street, knocked on the door early in the morning. She said she'd seen someone creeping out of our bulkhead door in the middle of the night. A figure, she said, tall, moved slow. She thought it was my dad at first, but then the person walked across the yard and disappeared down the side of the street toward the old mill road. My dad checked the lock. It was undone, lying in the grass. We hadn't touched it. That morning, the basement smelled different. There was a stronger damp smell, mixed with something sour. When I walked down, I noticed that some of the boxes near the crawl space had been shifted. Not a lot, just slightly angled, like they'd been pushed from the inside. There was a faint scuff mark on the floor, too. A long line in the dust where something or someone had dragged along. We called the police again. This time they searched longer. They found something wedged behind the far wall near the crawl space. It was a small folded blanket, a dirty water bottle, a rusted pocket knife. And the worst part, footprints. Bare footprints in the dust. Someone had been living in the crawl space of our basement for months. The space went farther back than we thought. It ran under part of the house and opened into a section behind an old furnace. Invisible, unless you crawled through. It was big enough for someone to sleep in. They never caught the man. They said whoever it was had probably been slipping in through the bulkhead door at night, maybe even before we moved in. He'd been living under us, right beneath our feet, listening to us walk, talk, sleep. The light, they said, was probably how he moved around without being caught. He'd flip it off when he heard footsteps. Flip it on when it was quiet. That was why it always turned itself on again. It wasn't wiring. It was him. After that, I couldn't sleep in that house the same way. Even after my dad sealed the crawl space with cement blocks, I could still feel it. The thought of someone lying just beneath the floor, listening to every sound we made the air in the house feel heavier. I started noticing every noise. Every creak felt sharper, closer. Every cool draft from the floor vents made my stomach tighten. We lived there for 2 more years, but it never felt like home after that. We put in alarms, motion lights, new locks, everything we could. Nothing happened again. No lights flicked on. No footprints. But I never went down to that basement alone again. Even after it was sealed, I avoided the stairs entirely. It wasn't just fear of someone breaking in. It was the feeling of knowing they already had. They'd been there for months. They'd walked in and out without anyone hearing a thing. When we finally moved out, the new owners asked us during the walkthrough why the basement door was nailed shut. My dad just said the space was sealed off, nothing more. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. That house had always held a quiet kind of weight to it. It wasn't the kind of place that forgot things. Even now, years later, I still remember that soft yellow light leaking through the vent at 3 a.m. That moment it flicked off. That feeling of someone already being there in the dark before I even knew it. I worked night shifts at a small gas station that sat along a 2-lane rural highway, a stretch of road that cut straight through our quiet town like a scar. I started that job in late spring, when the nights were still cool, and the crickets were the loudest thing you'd hear after midnight. The place was nothing special. 2 pumps, a small store, a flickering fluorescent sign that buzzed faintly when it got damp outside. From where the counter sat, I could see the intersection about 50 yards ahead. It was a 4-way stop that didn't really need to be there. The highway had almost no traffic at night, but they put a stop sign up in June after a nasty wreck. Pickup had blown through and hit a delivery van. No one died, but the front of that truck looked like it had been peeled open. I remember the first time I saw the black sedan. It was maybe a week after the new stop sign went in. It was late. I was leaning against the counter, half asleep, sipping the stale coffee that came out of the old machine behind me. The highway outside was empty, just the dark stretch of road fading into the tree line. Then at exactly 2:37 a.m., like someone flicked a switch, a car shot through the intersection. No headlights, no plates. Just a black blur moving too fast. The taillights never came on. It didn't even touch the brakes. It was gone in seconds, swallowed up by the dark road. At first, I thought maybe it was some local who didn't care about traffic laws. But the next night it happened again. Same time, same car. I looked at the clock the moment it passed. 2:37 a.m., not 2:36, not 2:38, always the same. I told myself maybe it was just coincidence, someone taking a shortcut home. But no one drove that road at night. People around here avoided it once the sun went down. Then the stop sign disappeared. I came in for my shift the next night, and as I walked up the lot toward the glass doors, I noticed the empty corner at the intersection. The stop sign was gone, not bent, not flattened, just gone. The post was missing too, like someone had dug it out and carried it off in the middle of the night. The town replaced it the next morning. That night it was gone again. And the next night, and the night after that, every time without fail, the sign wouldn't be there by the time the black car showed up. I started paying closer attention after that. The intersection became something I couldn't stop looking at. I'd stand by the front window for long stretches, watching the empty highway. Some nights I could hear the faint rumble before I saw it, like distant thunder rolling over the hills. Then it would come. Same black sedan, no headlights, engine whining as it flew past the empty pole where the stop sign was supposed to be. The sound of the tires was always the same too. Not screeching, not erratic. Just a steady rush of rubber on asphalt like it was gliding through. People in town started talking. Some thought it was some idiot pulling a prank, ripping out the sign to make a point. Others said it was probably stolen metal being sold off somewhere. But that never made sense. The sign was replaced over and over. Whoever was taking it would have needed tools, time, and a way to haul it away without anyone noticing. And this was a town where people noticed everything. The sheriff's department put a small camera on the light pole near the intersection. It wasn't anything fancy, just one of those boxy security cameras they use outside grocery stores. They set it up to catch whoever was removing the sign. When they checked the footage the next day, the car was there. You could see it coming down the road, but the sign wasn't. One frame it was standing upright. The next it just wasn't there anymore. No shadows, no movement, like it had never been installed at all. I wasn't in the room when they reviewed the footage, but one of the clerks who worked mornings told me they looked spooked. The town replaced the sign again, bolted it into a heavier steel post, and poured fresh concrete at the base. By the next morning, it was gone again. One night, a deputy decided to sit behind the station. He parked his cruiser in the dirt patch behind the dumpster, killed the engine, and waited. I didn't talk to him, didn't need to. I could tell by the way he moved, slow, deliberate, that he was one of those guys who didn't believe half of what he'd heard. I could tell he thought he'd catch some drunk kid or a group of idiots playing a game. It was a calm night. Cool air drifting through the trees, the hum of the lights above the pumps. Not a single car for hours. Then at 2:37 I heard it, that low distant sound like a storm rolling toward us. I walked up to the window. The sedan came out of the dark like a bullet. The deputy stepped out from behind the building with a flashlight in hand. He raised his arm and pointed the beam directly at the oncoming car. The light didn't even reflect off the windshield. The car didn't slow down. It cut through the intersection like the sign wasn't there. It passed so close to him I could see the beam of his flashlight bend and scatter off the body as it went by. He stumbled back a few steps, almost fell. The car didn't make a single sound after it passed. No engine, no tires. Just gone. The deputy came inside later. His face was pale, his breathing uneven. He kept looking back out toward the road like he expected it to return. He said there was no one behind the wheel. No driver, no silhouette. Just empty black glass. After that, no one in town would stop at that intersection at night. Even truckers coming through avoided that stretch after dark. A few nights later, One of the replacement stop signs was found in a creek 3 miles away, bent in half. Another was found in a drainage ditch behind a barn on the outskirts. Some of them were never found at all. I started to notice something else. The sedan always came from the same direction. It never turned, never swerved, just straight through and gone. Always headed south. There's nothing much that way. Just a few scattered houses, then woods, then more road that eventually curls back toward the state line. If you follow it far enough, it just fades into hills and trees. No one I knew had ever bothered to drive that way at night. I'd tried to convince myself it was just someone messing around. Some guy who got his hands on an old sedan and liked to scare people. But if it was a prank, it had gone on too long. And whoever it was, they were never caught. No plates, no headlights, no trail, nothing. I started to dread that time of night. I'd glance at the clock without meaning to. When the digital numbers turned to 2:37, my stomach would tighten. I'd hear the distant sound, and a few seconds later it would be there again, fast, precise, like it was part of the night itself. One night, after nearly a month of this, I decided to step outside just before it came. I don't really know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself it was just a car. Maybe I was just tired of staring through glass. The night was cold and still. I could smell wet asphalt from where they'd done patchwork on the road earlier that day. The pole where the sign used to be was empty again. Just a raw patch of concrete with marks where bolts had been torn clean. When the sound started coming up the road, it didn't feel distant. It felt close. The rumble built fast, sharper than before, like it was rushing down a tunnel. I stepped up to the edge of the lot and watched. The car broke through the dark like it always did. Black paint, no plates, no headlights. It didn't waver. It was aimed straight at the intersection like it knew every inch of it. For a second, as it crossed, I thought I saw something inside. Not a shape, not a person. Just the glint of light bouncing around the empty cabin. No movement, no hands on the wheel. It was so clean and sharp it didn't even seem like glass. Then it was gone, leaving nothing but the fading sound of tires. The next day, the town gave up replacing the sign. The pole stayed bare. No one filed a report about stolen property anymore. No one stood watch. People stopped talking about it. If you drove through that part of town at night, you'd just keep going. You didn't look toward the intersection. You didn't slow down. I kept working the night shift. I got used to it in a strange way. 2:37 a.m. became a part of the routine. Like the buzzing sign, like the smell of burned coffee, like the distant sound of crickets. I didn't even flinch when the sedan passed anymore. It was just there, always there. A month later, someone new started working the shift with me. He didn't know about the car. The first night, he asked why no one stopped at the sign down the road. I told him not to worry about it. He laughed, said it was strange. He'd learn soon enough. I never tried to follow it. I never tried to find out where it went. Some things you just leave alone. In a small town like ours, people don't need everything explained. If something keeps happening the same way every night and no one can stop it, eventually people just step aside and let it pass. The sign was never put back up again. The road stayed empty at night. Even the police stopped patrolling that stretch. And every night, like clockwork, at exactly 2:37 a.m., the black sedan cut through the intersection, untouched and unbothered, heading south into the dark where no one ever followed. I started working at the diner at the end of summer, the kind of time when the air starts to cool down a little at night. But the heat still lingers in the daytime. The place sat right off the highway, an old single-story building with a long front window and a faded red neon sign that read, Harlow's. The sign buzzed faintly when it lit up at night, casting a red glow over the parking lot. The inside still looked almost exactly like it did when it opened in the 1950s. It had those shiny red booths with cracked vinyl, a row of stools at the counter with chrome legs, and a big pie display by the register. There was a smell in the air that never changed. Grease, coffee, and something faintly sweet. Like sugar burnt into the floor over years. The booth by the window was the first thing I noticed on my first night shift. It was a 4-seater, right by the left end of the front window, closest to the highway. It was always spotless. The rest of the diner might have a few crumbs or a coffee ring or two between customers, but that booth always looked like it had just been scrubbed down. It was wiped clean. Napkins stacked perfectly, forks placed neat, the vinyl seat shining under the yellow ceiling lights. And it stayed empty. Always. Even when the place filled up and people stood at the counter waiting for tables, nobody was ever seated there. I didn't think much of it at first. Some places have weird rules. Maybe it was just something the owner did out of habit. The owner, June, had run the place for 30 years. She was quiet but sharp, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. She was the one who trained me. On my second night, while I was learning the rotation of tables and the way she liked the silverware wrapped, I asked about the booth. She didn't look up from what she was doing. She just said, "That booth is for her, nothing else." No explanation. She moved on to talking about shift change like it was just another sentence. I figured it was some small-town legend, some story they tell new hires. I didn't push. The weeks went by. I got used to the slow rhythm of the night shift. Most nights were quiet. A few truckers would stop in around 1 or 2 in the morning. Tired men with heavy steps and hands rough from work. Locals came in at the same times every night. Same orders, same seats. The highway outside was usually empty after midnight, except for the sound of the wind and the occasional engine passing. I liked the routine. I liked the way the diner felt like a small world sealed off from everything outside. But every now and then, someone who didn't know the rule would try to sit at that booth. Usually it was travelers, people just passing through, especially during storms or long winter nights when they wanted to get out of the weather. June never raised her voice, but she always stopped them. She would just step in front of the booth, shake her head once, and lead them to another table. She didn't have to explain. Something in her face made people listen. I saw it happen a few times, and after a while I didn't even think about it anymore. One night in late October, the weather turned fast. The sky went gray around 4 in the afternoon, and by the time my shift started at 8, rain was coming down hard. The sound of it on the roof was steady and heavy, and the wind pushed it against the big window, so it streaked down in long, uneven lines. We had more customers than usual because of the storm. Travelers mostly. People pulled off the highway to wait it out. I was moving fast between tables, trying to keep up with coffee refills and orders. The booth stayed empty, like always. But around 9, a couple came in. Man and woman, middle-aged, soaked from the rain. They didn't wait to be seated. They just went straight to the open booth by the window. I was at the counter and saw it happen. June saw it too. She was at the register counting bills. For a second, I expected her to go stop them like she always did, but she didn't. She just watched them sit down. The woman shook water out of her hair and laughed. The man looked tired. They didn't seem like they were from town. I glanced at June again, waiting for her to say something, but she didn't move. Just kept looking at them, her face tight. I had no choice but to bring menus. The couple ordered like normal. Burgers, fries, coffee, nothing unusual. I dropped off the food about 15 minutes later. Both plates looked good, hot and steaming in the warm light of the diner. I left them alone like I would with any other table. But when I came back maybe 20 minutes later, something felt wrong the second I got close. The rain outside had gotten heavier. It pounded the glass so loud that it almost drowned out the hum of the neon sign. The booth looked the same, but the woman was gone. Her plate was untouched, perfectly set in front of her seat. The man sat alone. He wasn't eating either. His burger sat on the plate, getting cold. His hands were flat on the table, and his face was pale like all the blood had drained out of it. He was staring at the window, not out of it, just at it. His coffee was still steaming, so she couldn't have been gone long. I looked around, thinking maybe she'd gone to the restroom. But no one had passed me. No one had opened the door either. The bell on the door was loud. You couldn't miss it. She hadn't walked out. She hadn't gone past the counter. She had just vanished from that booth in the time it took me to refill another table's drinks. I didn't say anything. I didn't even walk all the way up to him. Something about the way he was sitting, frozen like that, made my stomach feel tight. A minute later, he reached into his wallet, dropped some bills on the table, stood up and walked out into the rain without touching the food. The truck stop lights outside caught his figure as he left. He didn't run. He didn't look around. He just walked out like someone moving in a dream. The woman never came back. I cleared the table myself. The plate was still warm when I picked it up. 2 days later, the news came in. His truck was found abandoned at the edge of town, pulled onto the shoulder near the tree line. Driver's side door unlocked. Wallet and keys on the dash. It looked like he had just stepped out for a moment and didn't come back. No one saw him again. That was the first time I understood what June meant by "for her." It wasn't a story. It wasn't some joke to scare new hires. Something about that booth was tied to people disappearing. It didn't happen often, but when it did, there was no noise, no sign of a struggle, no explanation, just silence. Someone would sit down and one of them wouldn't leave. The diner didn't close after that. It never did. Nothing in town really changed either. That's the part that stuck with me the most. People just accepted it. Nobody came asking questions. The police came by when they found the truck, but they didn't stay long. The case just drifted, like others before it. I only learned later that it had happened more than once. Not every year, not often enough to make headlines, but enough that everyone in town knew to stay away from that booth after dark. No one really said why. They just obeyed it like they obeyed the seasons. As time went on, I noticed more small details about it. That corner of the diner was always colder than the rest of the place at night. Just a little, but enough to feel it when you walked by with a plate of food. The air there didn't move like the rest of the room. The light above it flickered sometimes, not fast, just a small, irregular pulse. Sometimes when it rained, I'd catch myself looking at the window from the counter, waiting without even realizing it. Nothing visible ever happened. Just the same empty seat, shining vinyl, napkins lined up. I worked at the diner for 3 years. In those 3 years, 4 people sat there at night. All 4 vanished the same way. Not one of them was ever found. They were travelers, strangers, people nobody local would question too much. The police wrote it off each time as someone leaving town on their own. They didn't have evidence to say otherwise. It was easier that way. Everyone let it fade. The owner never changed the booth. She didn't tape it off, didn't take it out. She just kept it clean, always ready, always empty. She never explained it again. She didn't have to. The people who worked there long enough knew. When night fell, no one touched it. If anyone tried to, they were turned away without discussion. It became something unspoken, the kind of rule no one broke twice. I quit eventually. Not because of the booth exactly, but because after a while it started to get under my skin. The quiet way it happened, the absence. There was no screaming, no struggle, no noise. Just people who were there, then weren't. The longer I worked there, the more I noticed how the booth seemed to draw attention without anyone meaning to look at it. It was like it had weight in the room. The last night I worked there, it rained again. I was wiping down the counter after close. The neon sign outside buzzed like always. June was locking up the register. I looked at the booth one more time. Empty, clean, waiting. I felt a pressure behind my ribs, like something I couldn't explain pressing back at me. I walked over and turned off the hanging light above it. June didn't say anything. She just watched me do it. I didn't come back the next night. I packed my things, left town, and didn't return. I still think about it sometimes. The way the woman was just gone. The cold in the air. The man's pale face. The abandoned truck on the edge of the woods. No answers. Just absence. What scared me most wasn't what happened. It was how everyone accepted it. How easily they let that booth stay part of the diner, like a chair, a napkin holder, a clock on the wall. It's still there. That little diner on the highway. Still open. Still serving. Every year our town does the same 4th of July parade. Same floats. Same route. It's one of those things that never changes no matter how much time passes. People line the sidewalks hours before it even starts. Flags go up a week earlier, and Main Street gets blocked off by noon. If you live here long enough, you can predict exactly which float will come next without even looking. The high school marching band, the veterans truck, the church float with kids holding sparklers, the local hardware store float with that loud country song they blast every single year. It's like muscle memory for the town. That year, I signed up to be on the volunteer cleanup crew. I'd just graduated, didn't have any big plans, and figured it would be something to do. Cleanup sounds boring, but it gives you a front row view of everything without needing to sit around all day holding a lawn chair. We follow the floats as they move through the route, picking up trash people drop, clearing confetti, making sure no one steps in front of a slow-moving trailer. It's simple work. It lets your mind drift. It was a clear afternoon, hot like always, the kind of heat that makes the pavement soft enough to smell the tar. Everyone was sweating through their shirts, but no one cared. People laughed. Kids ran up and down the sidewalks with those little flags on sticks. You could hear the high school band warming up blocks away. Everything felt the same, predictable, safe. I was standing just past the courthouse steps when the parade officially started. The police car with its flashing lights led the way, then the band, then the first wave of floats. I was walking along the curb holding a trash bag, kicking empty water bottles out of the way. About 10 minutes in, I saw something I couldn't place at first. At the far end of the street behind the veterans truck, there was an extra float. No banners, no decorations, no sound, just a flatbed trailer with 5 people standing on it. They were all wearing the same kind of pale, almost white masks. Smooth faces, no features except for tiny holes for eyes and nose. They didn't wave, they didn't move. They just stood there, perfectly still, as the float crept down the street. It looked almost unfinished compared to the rest. No bunting, no paint, nothing. Just a plain wooden platform and those 5 still figures. I remember looking around to see if anyone else noticed how strange it was, but people clapped like they did for everything else. I thought maybe it was some art thing I didn't know about. Our town has a few groups that try to do weird performance stuff sometimes, but it didn't fit. It wasn't in the schedule we were given before the parade. I checked because we always get a sheet with the order of every float and group, so we can prepare where to walk and what areas get crowded. It wasn't there. As it rolled past, I watched their hands. None of them moved, not even to shift their weight. Their heads were all tilted slightly down, like they were looking at the street instead of the crowd. It made the whole thing feel colder than it should have. No one else seemed bothered, just me. After the parade ended, all the floats turn off onto the back road that leads to the storage lot behind the high school. That's where cleanup crews finish their shift. We make sure nothing's dumped on the road, no loose decorations get caught in the fences, and everything lines up in the right place. I followed along like I always did, bag in hand, sweat sticking to the back of my neck. When I got to the lot, I walked down the line, counting floats like I usually do. Hardware store float, marching band trailer, veterans truck, church float, local grocery store, then the last one. But when I reached the end of the row, the masked float wasn't there. I thought maybe it had peeled off somewhere else, but there was only one route. The road leads straight there. There's no other turn. I asked a couple of the other volunteers if they saw the extra float. Nobody had. They just looked at me blankly like I was trying to mess with them. I didn't press it. It felt pointless. Maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe I was dehydrated and saw something wrong. The sun does weird things to people, but I couldn't shake the image. 5 people standing perfectly still, wearing masks that didn't belong in a parade. A float that disappeared as quietly as it came. A few days later, the first person went missing, a woman who worked at the diner on Main Street. They said she never came home after her shift. At first, people thought maybe she'd just gone somewhere, maybe taken off without telling anyone. But by the 3rd day, her car was still in the parking lot. Then 2 days later, another person vanished. Then another. 5 people in total went missing over that week. I didn't think about the float right away. But one night, lying in bed, it clicked in my head without warning. The 5 people on the float, 5 people missing. The shape and size of them in my memory lined up too well. One tall, wide-shouldered figure, 2 shorter ones side by side, one thin and lanky, one with their head tilted more than the others. I could picture them like a photograph burned into my head. The police held community meetings. They said there was no sign of forced entry in any of the disappearances. No clear connection between the missing people. A waitress, a man who worked at the hardware store, a kid home from college, 2 others. Different parts of town, different lives, but they were gone without a trace. It rattled the town in a way I'd never felt before. People who usually left their doors unlocked at night suddenly started installing deadbolts. Porch lights stayed on until sunrise. You could feel the unease hanging over everything. I told one of the guys I knew from cleanup about the float again. He just shrugged. Nobody else remembered it. There were hundreds of people at the parade, but apparently no one saw what I did. I even checked the local newspaper photos from the event. The photographers always take pictures of every float. I scrolled through all of them online. No photo of the masked float. Not a single one. It was like it had never been there. For a while, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe the heat. Maybe a float that got stuck and turned back before the lot. Maybe I was just wrong. But every time I passed the courthouse steps where I first saw it, I could still see it in my mind, rolling slowly forward. Silent. By the end of that summer, the 5 missing people were declared presumed dead. They never found anything. No car abandoned somewhere. No personal items, nothing. Just 5 people who were here one day and gone the next. The parade the following year went on like normal, but I didn't sign up for cleanup again. I stood far away from the route, almost out of town. I didn't want to see anything I couldn't explain again. After that, every 4th of July I leave. I don't stick around to watch the floats, the bands, or the crowd. I pack a bag and stay a few towns over. It's become a habit, almost a rule. The masked float hasn't appeared again since that year, but neither did those 5 people. No one else ever talks about it anymore. It's like the whole thing got absorbed into the quiet parts of the town that people don't bring up. Still, I know what I saw. I know the shape of those figures, how still they stood, how out of place they were. I know how something can appear in plain sight and still leave no trace. I think about the way that float rolled down Main Street, silent and unnoticed, and how it disappeared just as quietly. I don't think they came to be seen. I think they came for who they wanted, and once they got them, they were gone. Some people like to believe bad things always come with warning signs or reasons, but sometimes they just appear, pass through everything like smoke, and leave nothing behind except the space where they were. That's why I don't stay anymore. Not because I think they'll come back, but because I know they could. My grandparents' farm sat at the edge of a quiet town with a single blinking stoplight. The roads were flat and stretched out straight, disappearing into empty fields and tree lines that never seemed to end. Their house was old, built long before I was born. The wood was faded gray. The porch slanted a little and the roof creaked when the wind shifted. A few hundred yards from the house, near the edge of a dried-out cornfield, there was an old windmill. It was tall, rusted, the kind of rust that made deep orange streaks run down the metal legs. It had been there longer than anyone in the family could remember. It creaked and spun even when the air was still, like it had its own way of moving. When I was a teenager, I spent a summer there. My parents thought it would be good for me to get out of the city, breathe country air, help with chores, and stay away from the noise for a while. I liked the farm during the day. It was quiet in a way cities never were. Mornings smelled like wet grass and the sun rose over fields that looked endless. You could hear every small sound. Cows moving in the distance, the screen door slamming shut, the low hum of the well pump, and that windmill creaking steady, like a clock that never ran out. But the nights were different. There weren't any streetlights, no cars, no glow from nearby houses. When the sun went down, the land was swallowed by darkness. You could step off the porch and see nothing but the faint shape of the windmill against the sky. I slept in the small bedroom at the side of the house. It had a narrow window that faced the fields and a direct view of the windmill. At night, I could hear it creaking through the thin glass. It was constant, like breathing, always there in the background. But every night around midnight, it would stop. Not slow down, not fade. Just stop, like someone flipped a switch. The sudden silence would wake me up, and after it stopped, I would hear footsteps, slow, heavy steps on the gravel outside my window, one after another. It wasn't the sound of an animal. I grew up in a city. but I knew the difference between a raccoon scuffling around and the weight of boots on loose rock. It would get close, pause, then keep going. When I pulled the curtain back to look, there was nothing. No movement, no shadow. Just the windmill standing there, completely still. At first, I thought it was my uncle. He liked to joke around. I imagined him walking around the house at night to mess with me. Maybe rattling a shovel or stomping on the gravel just to get a reaction. I didn't say anything about it. I just tried to ignore it. But it happened every single night. Midnight. Windmill stops. Footsteps. Nothing outside. The days blurred together in the kind of slow rhythm farms have. I helped feed chickens, mowed the lawn, and carried buckets of water to places that needed it. In the distance, the blinking red light from the stoplight in town would flash faintly. You could hear the occasional truck on the highway miles away, but mostly it was just heat, dry wind, bugs, and the steady creak of that windmill. One night near the middle of summer, I decided to go outside. I had been lying in bed for almost an hour after the footsteps started. My heart was beating fast even though nothing had ever actually happened. The thought of finally seeing what it was made me feel sick, but I couldn't keep doing nothing. So I grabbed the big old flashlight that sat on the floor near the bed and crept out to the porch. The air was thick and warm. You could smell dust. The flashlight was heavy and the beam cut a long white path across the yard. The second I stepped off the porch, everything went silent. Not quiet. Not like the sound was fading, but completely silent. I couldn't hear the crickets or the frogs by the ditch or the faint hum from the highway. Even the air felt still in a way that didn't seem natural. I held my breath without meaning to. I shined the flashlight toward the windmill. That was when it started creaking again. Slow, deliberate, like it was winding itself up. The blades moved even though the air was dead still. Made this long moaning sound as it spun. Metal on metal, dry and rough. I couldn't hear anything else, and that made it worse. I turned and ran back up the porch steps and slammed the door behind me. My hands were shaking so hard that I dropped the flashlight. I locked the door, even though there had never been a reason to lock doors out there. After that night, I stopped trying to ignore it. I lay in bed with the blanket pulled tight and waited for it to happen every night. The sound of the windmill stopping was like a clock telling me the time without a watch. The footsteps followed without fail. One night I counted them. 11 steps, a pause. Then nothing. About a month later, they dug near the base of the windmill. My grandfather was fixing a broken fence post, and when he went to set it in the ground, his shovel hit something hard. He thought it was an old root or scrap metal. When he pulled it up, it was a boot. An old leather work boot torn open along the seams. Inside there were bones, not animal bones, human, small, thin, like they had been there for decades. The leather was damp and dark, and the dirt around it smelled different, sour and stale. The police came. It was the most movement the town had seen in a while. 2 cars, a white van, men in uniforms walking around the field. The windmill turning above their heads like it didn't care about anything happening below. They set up tape, dug more, found more pieces, a jawbone, ribs, some cloth that might have once been a shirt. It was old, too old to know anything right away. People in town talked. They remembered stories about a drifter who went missing years back, or a farmhand who didn't show up for work one day, or a kid who disappeared walking home in the dark in the 1960s. No one knew for sure who it was. The farm was older than most people who live there now. It had changed owners a few times before my grandparents bought it. Whatever happened near that windmill had been buried longer than I'd been alive. For the rest of that summer, I couldn't sleep through a single night. Even though the police had been all over the place, nothing changed. The windmill still creaked when it shouldn't. It still stopped spinning at midnight. The footsteps didn't stop either. If anything, they sounded closer, slower, like whoever it was walking out there was taking their time. When the summer ended, I went back to the city. I didn't talk about it much. People don't really listen when you say things like that. They want explanations or jokes, or for you to say it was just the wind. I never told them how it felt to stand in the dark and have the whole world go silent. I never told them how my chest would lock up when the windmill stopped. I just went home and tried not to think about it. But even now, when I visit, it's still there. Same windmill, same fields, same house leaning a little more each year. The windmill creaks and at night it still stops. No one's ever figured out who those bones belong to. No one's ever said why the footsteps keep coming. But they do. Every night, same time, same sound. The farm hasn't changed much except the grass is taller and the fields aren't used like they used to be. The windmill is rusting more, tilting a little to one side now, but it still moves even when the air doesn't. And every time I'm back there, lying in that small room with the window facing the fields, I wait for that moment when everything stops. The silence feels heavier now that I know what's buried out there. It's the kind of silence that isn't empty. It's the kind that's listening. There was one house on Orchard Lane that nobody bought. It sat on the corner, leaning just a little toward the cracked sidewalk, like the earth had shifted under it. The grass grew up to my knees, uneven and wiry, and thorny vines crawled across the porch like they had claimed it long ago. The paint on the siding peeled in long, curled strips that reminded me of old skin. All the windows were boarded shut with sun-faded plywood, and the front door was splintered around the edges, like someone had tried to pry it open at some point. The realtor had dropped the price again and again, down to almost nothing, but still no one moved in. Everyone in town just passed by it without a second glance. No one trimmed the yard, no one even parked near it. I had always noticed it whenever I walked to school or rode my bike down that street. It stuck out from the other houses like a bad tooth. Everything around it was tidy. Freshly painted fences, small gardens, trimmed lawns. And then there was this house, sunken and silent, sitting in its own shadow. People said things about it. Not supernatural stories exactly, just that bad things happened there. One guy said a family abandoned it in the middle of the night years ago. Someone else said the last person who lived there left all their stuff behind like they were running from something. I never knew how much of it was true, but it had a way of making my stomach tighten when I walked past. When my cousin dared me to spend the night inside, I said yes without thinking it through. I said it to prove something, mostly to myself. I told myself it was just a house, wood, nails, a roof. It couldn't do anything to me. But the closer it got to that night, the heavier it sat on me. I packed light. A sleeping bag, a flashlight, and my phone. I didn't tell anyone else what I was doing, which I now realize was stupid. If something went wrong, no one would even know where to find me. I waited until it got dark, then walked down Orchard Lane with my bag over my shoulder. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The sky was a deep, even black. Porch lights glowed softly along the street, but the old house sat in a dark pocket where no light seemed to land. The front porch creaked the second I stepped on it. The boards sagged under my weight like they might give out. I ran my hand over the railing, and flakes of paint stuck to my fingers. I pushed the door gently, and it opened with a low, scraping sound. The air inside was heavy, like it had been trapped for years. It smelled damp, with a hint of something sour, like wet wood and rot. I stood there for a long time before I stepped in fully. The light from the street behind me stretched through the doorway but didn't reach far. The inside of the house swallowed the light like it didn't want it. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it slowly around. The walls were bare, just old plaster cracked in long, thin lines. The floor was coated in dust, thick enough to muffle my footsteps. In one corner, a pile of broken furniture leaned against the wall. An old chair, the frame of a table, what looked like part of a door. I made my way to what used to be the living room. The floorboards groaned with every step. There were no curtains, no furniture except that pile of junk. The ceiling had water stains spreading out like bruises. A dead moth crunched under my shoe. It felt like the house had been sitting still for years. Not touched, not cleaned, just waiting for time to eat it. I picked a spot in the center of the room, where I could see both the front door and the hallway that led to the kitchen. I unrolled my sleeping bag carefully, brushing dust away with my foot. The air was colder inside than it was outside, the kind of cold that sinks into your skin slowly. I laid down, zipped myself in, and kept the flashlight beside me. I tried to listen to the silence, I could hear the faint ticking of something dripping somewhere deeper in the house. I could hear the wind push against the loose boards outside. Once or twice I thought I heard something shift, like a small creak in the hallway, but I told myself it was the house settling. Time moved slowly. Every minute stretched. My phone said 12:46 a.m. The battery was already half gone from using the flashlight too much earlier in the evening. I kept turning the screen on to check the time because it felt like hours had passed. Eventually, I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the flashlight was still on but dimmer, and the house felt colder. My phone said 2:03 a.m. That was when I heard it. Footsteps, they were faint at first, a soft, slow creaking. I thought maybe it was from outside, maybe the wind pushing a loose board on the porch. But it kept going, steady, rhythmic above me. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of it. The house didn't have a second floor. The ceiling was just a flat stretch of plaster with old light fixtures. There was no attic hatch I could see, but the sound was clear. Footsteps moving across the ceiling like someone pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The sound wasn't distant or muffled. It was directly above me, so close it made the hair on my arms rise. I remember the exact feeling in my chest. It wasn't panic at first. It was a tight, sharp pressure that made it hard to swallow. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to explain it away. Maybe it was something on the roof. A raccoon, a branch scraping, something normal. But the sound wasn't random. It was weighty, with small pauses between each step, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. Then the steps stopped, right above me. The silence that followed felt heavier than the footsteps. My heart pounded so loud it almost filled the room. I kept staring up, waiting for the sound to come back. It didn't. I could feel sweat gathering at the back of my neck even though the air was cold. I was too afraid to move the flashlight, too afraid to make a sound. I held my breath until my chest burned and my vision blurred at the edges. Something dripped. A soft, wet sound, then another. I tilted my flashlight upward slowly, muddy footprints on the ceiling. They stretched in a clear path across the plaster, dark and wet, and fresh enough that drops of mud were falling from them onto the floor next to my sleeping bag. The prints were the size of a person's feet, bare feet, not boots, not shoes. They had shape and detail. You could even see the toes. My hands started shaking. I tried to unzip my sleeping bag quietly, but the zipper rasped against the fabric louder than it ever should have. My flashlight flickered once. I got out of the bag on my knees and kept my eyes on those prints, like if I looked away, they would move again. I didn't care about my stuff. I grabbed my phone, shoved the flashlight in my pocket, and ran for the door. The floor groaned under me like it was trying to grab at my feet. I threw the door open and didn't look back. I ran down the porch steps so fast I almost tripped on the bottom one. The air outside was warmer, but it felt thin, like I couldn't get enough of it. I didn't stop running until I reached the next block. My chest ached. My lungs burned. I sat on the curb under a streetlight and tried to steady my breathing. The house sat at the end of the street, still dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I told the police. I told them exactly what I saw. They came to the house. They searched it top to bottom. They didn't find anyone inside. No signs of forced entry. No attic, no crawl space above the living room. Nothing. But they did find the footprints on the ceiling. I saw the officer shining his flashlight on them. The mud was still damp. They told me they didn't know how it happened. Someone might have gotten in and out without being seen. Maybe someone had been in the house before I arrived. They said a lot of things, but none of it explained the sound of footsteps above a ceiling that shouldn't have been walked on. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep right. Every night I lay in bed listening for creaks in my ceiling. Every sound made me tense. I started waking up around the same time, 2 a.m., like my body remembered that exact hour. I never went back to that house, not even during the day. A few months later, someone finally bought it. I don't know who they were. They fixed it up, new paint, new fence, fresh windows. It almost looked normal again, but every time I walked past it, I look at the roof without meaning to. I wonder if they ever hear anything at night. The police never found out who left those footprints or how they got there. There's no attic, no stairs, no explanation that fits cleanly into reality. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw dripping from that ceiling. And I know that somewhere in that house something walked above me when it shouldn't have been possible. Our town is small. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where nothing really changes. One high school, one middle school, one grocery store that closes before 9, and one single bus driver who's been driving the same route since before most of us were born. Her name was Carol. She wore the same windbreaker every day, no matter the weather, and always had a travel mug of coffee sitting on the dashboard. When I was a kid, I thought she'd always be there. People here don't really come and go. That's why the morning it happened stood out from the second I stepped outside. The air was colder than usual for early October, sharp enough that it bit at the skin. Fog hung low over the cracked asphalt of our road, gathering around the stop sign like it was holding on to something. I walked toward the bus stop with my backpack cutting into my shoulder, and my breath leaving little puffs in the air. The bus headlights came through the fog earlier than I expected. When it pulled up, everything looked normal. The same yellow paint, the same number painted in black above the front tire. But the man behind the wheel wasn't Carol. I noticed it before I even climbed the steps. He wore the uniform, had the reflective vest on, hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 like every training poster I'd seen in the school hallway. But his shoulders were too square, his posture too stiff, like someone sitting in a chair they didn't fit into. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared straight ahead, eyes fixed on the empty road in front of him even as the door hissed open. I hesitated for half a second, enough for the kid behind me to nudge forward impatiently. I climbed the steps and looked at him as I passed. His face didn't move. No nod, no small smile like Carol always gave, nothing. Just a blank stare locked forward. Inside, the other kids were whispering. I slid into a seat near the back. I could hear the engine rumble low beneath the floor, steady like it always did. The heater vents blew lukewarm air against my legs. The bus smelled faintly of diesel and old rubber. It all felt familiar and wrong at the same time. He drove the exact same route, stopped at every corner. No mistakes. He used the mirror above the windshield to check behind him, but I never saw his eyes meet anyone's. A couple of kids near the front tried to talk to him at one point. I remember the way their voices carried through the bus, bouncing off the metal ceiling. He didn't answer, not once. He just kept both hands on the wheel, knuckles pale, jaw tight. When we pulled up to the school, he opened the door without a word. Usually Carol said something like, "Have a good day," or at least waved. He didn't. He just stared at the road ahead while we filed out. I looked back over my shoulder before stepping down. His head didn't move. His face didn't change. Just that same stiff posture. At the time, it didn't seem dangerous. Just strange. Like when someone forgets your name even though they've known you forever. All day at school, people talked about it. Nobody knew where Carol was. Nobody had seen her that morning. Someone said maybe she was sick. Someone else said she'd retired. Nobody knew who the new guy was. Nobody had ever seen him in town before. The next morning, I expected him to be there again. But when I walked out into the cold air and saw the bus rolling down the road, it was Carol. Same windbreaker. Same travel mug of coffee on the dash. When I climbed on, she gave me that familiar nod and said my name like she always did. It felt like the world had reset overnight. I sat near the back again. Kids were quieter that morning, like everyone was trying to figure out if yesterday had really happened. When we got to school, I waited until the others got off. I walked up to Carol and asked her where the sub-driver was. She frowned like she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she hadn't missed a shift, not one. I could tell by the way she said it, she really believed that. That day after school, a group of kids went to the bus yard behind the district offices. They keep security cameras there to make sure no one messes with the vehicles at night. One of them had an older brother who worked part-time for the district, cleaning the buses. He let us look at the recordings from the morning before. There was nothing. No man getting on the bus, no substitute signing in, no second person showing up at all. The camera just showed the bus sitting in the lot, empty. No movement until Carol climbed in the next morning like nothing had happened. But every kid on that route remembered him. The man, the silence, the way his hands looked like they were welded to the steering wheel. We all rode with him. We all felt the rumble of the engine under our feet. We all stepped down at the school that day and watched his face not move as we passed. People tried to explain it away. Someone said maybe it was a glitch in the security system. Someone else said maybe Carol came in early, left, then came back. But that didn't make sense either. We all saw him. We all knew what we'd experienced. For months after that, I couldn't shake the feeling. At night, the sound of a bus engine would travel far in our town. The main road cut through everything, and the late-night route passed right behind my house. The sound was always low at first, then got louder, then faded again. Every time I heard it, I'd look out the window. The streetlight across from our house had a weak orange glow that never fully lit the road. It left gaps where shadows gathered, and every single time I'd look out, my eyes would lock on the driver's seat. Not for long, just enough to check. Just enough to make sure it was Carol or the regular night driver. But some nights I wasn't sure. The glass caught reflections in a strange way. It made it hard to see clearly. Once, late on a windy night, I thought I saw the outline of shoulders that were too straight, a figure sitting too stiff. The bus slowed a little near the stop sign even though no one was there. I held my breath against the glass until the bus pulled away. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. But that feeling didn't go away. It crept into the edges of normal life. I'd walk home and catch myself glancing at every yellow bus that passed, waiting for something in the driver's seat to be wrong. I started remembering tiny details about that morning I hadn't thought about before. How the air inside the bus felt colder than usual, even with the heater on. How he blinked less than any person I'd ever seen. How not one radio station played through the speakers. Carol always played the same oldies station. He had the radio turned off. Weeks turned into months. No one ever figured out who he was. No one like him ever showed up in town again. But the district quietly added a new step to the morning checks at the bus yard. All drivers had to sign in and be logged by the dispatcher before they could take a bus out. It wasn't there before. They didn't say it was because of that day, but everyone knew. I graduated a few years later, moved to another town, a bigger one with more noise, more faces, more things to distract me. But sometimes late at night when I'd hear a bus drive by on the street outside, I'd still look up. I'd still check the driver's seat. That part never really went away. The last time I went back to visit my parents, it was October again. The air had the same sharp cold. The fog hung over the road the way it had that morning. I was driving home from a late dinner when I saw a school bus coming the opposite way. No lights inside, just the dull shine of the headlights cutting through the mist. As it passed, I turned my head, just enough to see the driver's seat. Just enough to catch a glimpse of someone with their hands locked tight at 10 and 2, shoulders square, eyes forward. It was over in seconds. Just a blur of yellow in the fog. I told myself it was nothing, just another driver, but my hands tightened on the steering wheel without me realizing. My chest felt tight the way it had back then. I sat in the driveway for a long time that night before going inside. Just sitting there, engine off, listening to the quiet. Every few minutes I thought I heard a low rumble in the distance. It was probably nothing. Probably just trucks on the highway. But I watched the end of the street anyway. The bus never came back. I didn't see him again. But that doesn't really matter. The thing that stays isn't the sight of him. It's the way the world can fold for a moment and hand you something that isn't supposed to exist. And once you've seen it, it never really leaves. I still check every bus that passes, every single one. Every small town has its one dangerous place. Ours was the quarry. It sat about 2 miles out of town, past the old service road with cracked asphalt and weeds pushing through every seam. People used to say it was once a big operation, years ago, before anyone my age was born. Now it was just an open pit of jagged cliffs and dark water that seemed to have no bottom. It was the kind of place that felt quiet in a way that didn't seem right. Even during the day, the air was still, like sound didn't want to exist there. In the summer, kids went up there even though we all knew we weren't supposed to. There was no fence anymore. It had rusted away long before. Just a single weathered sign nailed to a leaning post that said, "Keep out," in faded red letters. Everyone said the quarry was dangerous. A few people had drowned years ago. No one ever talked about it much, but we all knew. It was the kind of story that gets passed down through older kids. Just enough to keep it alive, but not enough to feel real. That summer was hot and dry. The air stuck to your skin like glue. Everything smelled like dust and grass that hadn't seen rain in weeks. One night, a group of us decided to hike up there. It wasn't the first time anyone had done it. People always said it felt different at night. We wanted to feel it for ourselves. It wasn't about being brave. It was about pushing into that quiet that everyone avoided. We met at the back road near the grain silos, where the smell of metal and old grain hung heavy. There were 5 of us. We brought cheap flashlights, the kind that flicker when the batteries get weak, and one person carried a small cooler with a few warm drinks. The walk up wasn't hard, but it felt longer than it should have. The deeper we went, the less we heard anything else. The crickets faded. The road ended. The path narrowed. Gravel under our shoes echoed too loud. The quarry sat in a wide clearing surrounded by tall trees. Even in the dark, I could see the way the cliffs dropped down clean and sharp into black water. The surface of the water never reflected anything at night. It was like a hole. Cold air came off it in waves, sharp and heavy, almost like stepping into a different place. We sat along the edge with our feet dangling over the drop. You could hear the water far below, not moving, just pressing against the rocks. It was the kind of quiet that makes your chest feel too tight. Someone started tossing rocks, listening to them fall. You couldn't see where they landed. It was just a long pause, then a soft, distant splash. It didn't sound right. It was too deep, too far away. Then it started. A tapping, sharp, metallic, clean. It came from across the water, echoing off the rock walls. At first, it didn't make sense. It was too regular. Tap, 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 a short pause. Then again, tap, tap, tap. It was like something hitting metal, not random like wind or water. The sound carried clear across the quarry, bouncing back off the cliffs. Every hair on my arms lifted. It didn't sound close, but it didn't sound far either. I turned my flashlight toward the opposite cliff, the one that curved around in a half-moon shape. The beam of light cut across the water, landing on rough rock and scattered brush. Nothing moved. Just stone, shadows, and that sound. Others pointed their flashlights too. The tapping didn't stop. It kept going with the same rhythm, like it wasn't aware or didn't care we were there. I scanned every inch I could see. The rocky ledges, the tree line behind, the loose gravel slope. Nothing. No movement. No sign of anything at all. Just that sound in the dark. Then, almost in the same second, our lights went out. All of them. Not flickering, not dimming slowly. Just black. Total darkness. The kind where you can't see your own hand even if it's an inch from your face. The sound of the tapping didn't stop. It grew sharper, clearer, like it was filling the empty space. For a second, I didn't move. I just sat there with the edge of the quarry inches from my feet. The black water somewhere below. My chest thudded. I could feel the pulse in my neck. Then someone shifted behind me, and gravel scattered near the drop. It snapped something inside me. I pushed myself back fast, scraping my palms against rock. My legs stumbled against dry grass and loose stone as I felt for the path we came from. We didn't talk. No one said a word. It was all just movement and crunching dirt, and the sound of someone breathing too hard. I couldn't tell who was where. I just followed the sound of footsteps downhill. The tapping echoed behind us, steady, like it didn't care we were leaving. The faster we moved, the more that sound stayed the same distance away. The trail down was rough. It wasn't meant to be walked at night. I tripped twice, tore my knee open on a rock. My hands were raw from catching myself. I didn't stop. I just kept going until the trees thinned out, and the gravel of the road crunched under my shoes again. By the time we reached the silos, my shirt was soaked with sweat, my heart was pounding, and the night felt normal again. Crickets were back. The air was warm. The tapping was gone. The next morning the air was bright and harsh. Sunlight made the quarry look different. It was just a hole in the ground again. Not mysterious. Just sharp cliffs and still water. We went back not together but in twos and threes over the day. It was like none of us wanted to say we were scared, so we all pretended to be curious instead. The cliff across the water was exactly where we'd aimed our lights the night before. There was nothing obvious. No one, no fresh footprints, no trash. But hanging from a rusted steel bar driven into the rock face was a length of chain. It wasn't thick, just enough to hold something or someone once. It was swaying slowly, even though there was no real wind. Just a soft creaking sound of old metal shifting under its own weight. The chain didn't look new. It was dark with rust flaking at the edges, probably there for years. No one could figure out why it was swinging like that. There was nothing nearby that could have made it move. No rope tied to it, no sign of people. Just a bare cliff and water that seemed too still. We left it alone. No one touched it. That was the thing about the quarry. Even during the day, no one liked staying there for too long. It wasn't fear you could explain. It was just something quiet and cold that got inside your head and made you want to be somewhere else. 2 weeks later, a kid from the next town over went missing. The last place anyone saw him was near the quarry. He was older than us, someone who liked pushing things too far. People said he went swimming there alone at night. They never found him. They dragged the water for days. Brought in divers, nothing, no body, no clothes, nothing at all. After that, people stopped going there. Not just kids, everyone, even adults avoided the road that led up. The sign that said "Keep Out" got covered in weeds and no one bothered to clear them. It wasn't talked about openly, but the silence around it grew. The quarry became the kind of place people didn't joke about anymore. I think about that night sometimes, about how clean that tapping sound was, how every flashlight failed at the same second, how the chain moved with no wind. There's nothing supernatural about cliffs, chains, or water. They're just objects, but the quarry doesn't need ghosts to be dangerous. It never did. When people disappear, it's usually because of something that doesn't leave easy marks. A slip, a fall, a current no one can see, one bad decision in the wrong place. I can picture him standing there, maybe hearing the same tapping we did, maybe going closer to it. One wrong step on loose rock, a chain that used to hold something but now held nothing at all. The quarry doesn't make noise during the day. But at night, if the wind dies down and everything goes quiet, people say you can still hear that same sound. Sharp, rhythmic, metal on metal. No one goes close enough to check anymore. Not after what happened. And the truth is, they don't need to. Everyone already knows the quarry doesn't give things back.